The story I'm about to tell you happened many years ago when my husband and I decided to sell our home to move out of state. My sister-in-law, who was a real estate attorney at the time, suggested that we sell the home ourselves instead of listing it with a realtor. We decided to take her advice and we placed a for sale sign outside of our home. Little did we know that the simple act of posting a for sale sign in front of our house would lead me down a path of terror and survival. On a quiet afternoon, while going about my daily routine, the doorbell rang. I was a bit startled because I wasn't expecting any visitors, and most of the people I knew would call before stopping by. I approached the door cautiously and looked through the peephole to catch a glimpse of the unexpected visitor. A middle-aged man with well-groomed hair wearing a suit and tie stood on my porch. I thought he must have been a salesman of some sort, or maybe just someone at the wrong address. His voice carried a sense of urgency as he spoke. "Excuse me, ma'am. I noticed your for sale sign and was wondering if it's possible to view the inside of the house." I hesitated for a moment and was very nervous when I told him, "I'm sorry, but my husband isn't home right now. Perhaps you could come back when he returns from work." He gave me a big smile, and I remember being impressed by how perfect his teeth were. He said, "Oh, that won't be necessary. I promise I won't take much of your time. It's just a quick look." I was a bit apprehensive, but my husband and I were eager to sell our home, and so I considered his request. Something about his demeanor made me trust him, and I know many of you won't be able to wrap your minds around that. He looked normal and unthreatening, so at the time I didn't see the harm in having him view the home. Reluctantly, I opened the door wider and allowed the stranger into my home. I told him he was more than welcome to look through the rooms and told him to let me know if he had any questions. I thought it was a little strange that he didn't ask any questions about the home. From my experience, most people would ask about the bedrooms and bathrooms, the square footage and acreage, etc. He just walked around silently. I maintained a cautious distance as he went from room to room. I started to feel uneasy. I remained in the safety of my living room, refusing to walk through the home with him. He attempted to lure me upstairs, emphasizing the importance of viewing the bedrooms. But a voice within me screamed in warning, telling me to stay put. I sensed danger lurking beneath his polite facade. "I'm sorry, but I'm more comfortable staying down here. You are more than welcome to enter any of the rooms you wish." "The doors are all open," I said firmly, my heart pounding in my chest. He didn't respond to me, but he continued exploring. Minutes felt like hours as I waited anxiously for him to complete his tour. Finally, he started making his way from upstairs. I looked at him and he had a big grin on his face. "Thank you for your time, ma'am. The house is lovely," he commented casually. His comment seemed a little sarcastic, but I wasn't sure. I was just happy he was leaving. I was so relieved when he finally left. I watched him exit through the front door. Little did I know that my encounter with him was just the beginning of what I would later find out about the strange man. My husband came home that evening, and I told him about the strange man. He was a bit upset with me, and we agreed that we would only show the property together. Several days passed. We showed our home to a few more potential buyers. We had been getting good feedback and knew we would soon have an offer. One morning, while my husband was reading the newspaper in the kitchen where I also cooked breakfast, I saw a disappointed look come over his face, followed by a loud sigh. He read aloud a story about a woman in a nearby neighborhood that had been brutally murdered. The details sounded very similar to my own encounter, the same man, the same method of luring her into her own home. I was so scared as I realized the severity of the danger I had barely escaped. The realization hit me like a tidal wave, and I knew immediately that the woman in the paper could have easily been me. I immediately contacted the authorities, sharing every detail of my encounter with the stranger who had invaded my home. The investigation intensified as detectives pieced together the puzzle of this predator. It became clear that he targeted vulnerable women using the guise of house viewings to gain access to our homes. My heart ached for the victim and her family. As the investigation unfolded, multiple women came forward and shared their experiences with the same man who had also knocked on their doors and asked to view their property. Some of the women claimed that their homes weren't even on the market. Many of them did not let him into their home, which made me feel so stupid. My husband kept assuring me that I wasn't stupid and reminded me of how eager we were to sell our home. It took me a long time to get over letting this evil predator into my home and to stop beating myself up about letting him get that close to me. I became much more aware of the fragility of my own safety. For a while, every creak of the floorboards, every passing shadow, caused me anxiety. Months turned into years as the case against the predator continued. Witness testimonies, DNA evidence, and tireless investigative work that resulted in his conviction. I was relieved and felt like a weight lifted from the shoulders of an entire community. During the trial, I faced him once more. At one point, I locked eyes with the evil man who had invaded my home. As I spoke my testimony, I refused to let fear overshadow my voice, refusing to give him the satisfaction that he would feel to know how he terrorized me. He was sentenced to a lifetime behind bars, forever removed from society. Justice was served.
A few years before meeting my current husband, I had met a guy while at the mechanic shop. Let's call this guy Joey. At the time I met him, Joey was working at the mechanic shop and had worked on my car a few times before asking me out on a date. I always thought he was attractive and didn't hesitate to say yes when he asked me out. We went out a few times, and our dates went very well, so by the third date he suggested that I come to his place where he would cook dinner. I should mention that Joey and I were both fairly young at the time. I was still living at home with my parents and younger sister, and he was living in the basement of his parents' house. I agreed to meet him at his place for dinner and was quite excited to learn more about him and to see where he was living. I pulled up to the address he had given me, which led me to a quaint house within the upscale community. Like I said, I was very excited, as this would be the first time I would enter his world. I walked up to his house and rang the doorbell, feeling a mix of nerves and anticipation. He opened the door with a grin, inviting me into his home. He led me down the stairs to the basement where he lived. The basement was nice, and I could tell that had cleaned up right before I came. His living space looked like a bachelor pad, very different from how my room looked at my parents' house. As we settled into the dining area, he served dinner, which was a simple meal, but I was still impressed that he was cooking for me, as no other guy besides my dad had ever cooked for me. I forgot to mention that I had brought a bottle of wine with me. He admitted that he wasn't much of a drinker because he didn't have much experience drinking, and said that he didn't hold his liquor very well. I guess he wanted to impress me because he went upstairs to the main level of the house and returned with 2 wine glasses. He poured wine in both glasses, and we snuggled on the couch. When we were about halfway through the second glass of wine, he started telling me a story about one of his neighbors. He said she was an old lady who lived just down the street. He said she lived alone and rarely came outside. According to him, she had been brutally murdered a few weeks prior, her killer still at large. He got into the details with a disturbing fascination. He went on and on about the morbid details. I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease, a creeping suspicion that there was more to his story than met the eye. But I pushed those thoughts aside, convincing myself that he was just sharing local gossip. A few days had gone by, and I continued communicating with him. We would text a few times a day and sometimes talk on the phone. One afternoon, I went to visit my grandma, who loved watching the news. While I was watching the news with her, a report caught my attention. A mugshot flashed across the screen, followed by a chilling headline which was something like, "Suspect arrested in gruesome murder case." My heart pounded as recognition set in. It was him, the man I had trusted, the man who had shared that crazy story. I was shocked and in total disbelief as I listened to the details of the murder of the old lady down the street. That story made me fear for my own grandma, who at the time was living alone like the old lady who had been murdered. I blocked that guy's number immediately and never saw or spoke to him again for obvious reasons. I couldn't believe that I came in such close contact with that creep. I would have never imagined meeting someone like that in a million years. It took me a while to even trust another guy, and when I met my husband a few years later, he had to work really hard to get my trust. I have always considered myself a compassionate person, someone willing to lend a helping hand to those in need. One day when I was leaving a local coffee shop, there was a homeless man, shivering and huddled against the wall. That day, the weather was brutally cold, and I felt bad for him. He wasn't even wearing a coat. I approached him cautiously and said, "Excuse me, sir," extending a few bills from my wallet. "I hope this helps." At that point, I was still holding my wallet in my hand. He looked really happy and showed gratitude and surprise as he accepted the money and said, "Thank you, ma'am, God bless you." It felt good inside to know that I was helping someone in need. I turned to leave. But before I could take a single step, I could hear a lot of moving around like the man was getting up. I glanced back, and my heart sank when I saw the same man lunging towards me. His face looked twisted with a look of desperation. I was so scared out of my mind and felt helpless. In an instant, he grabbed me and violently snatching at my purse. I was fighting back, screaming for help as we struggled, but he was too strong and was able to overpower me. I know people may think I was naive, but I honestly didn't expect that. Finally, the man let go of me and vanished into the shadows. I was still on the ground in so much pain, and tears streamed down my face as I lay there with a sprained ankle and bruised knee. I was on the ground for a couple of minutes, which felt like forever, before people finally approached me. Everyone was concerned and they helped me to my feet. An older lady told me that he had called the police and they were on their way. The police got there quickly, and while taking my statement and promising to do everything in their power to catch the suspect. It didn't take long, because about 5 minutes later I was told that the homeless man responsible for the attack had been found. He was only half a mile away when a police officer spotted entering an alleyway. I was so happy that he was caught, even though he no longer had my purse and wouldn't tell the police officers where he threw it. Now when I see homeless people on the street, I still feel sorry for them, but I put my safety first in those situations. I also carry a taser now to keep myself safe.
One Saturday morning at about 3 o'clock, I woke up to the sound of barking. Sometimes my dog had to go to the bathroom at the most odd times, and I would let him out to do his business for about 20 minutes. After a while, I heard my dog barking again from my backyard. At that point, I had dozed off again. I rubbed the sleep from my eyes. When I looked up at the clock, I noticed that he had been outside for 2 whole hours. I threw on my robe and hurried downstairs, wondering what could be causing my usually calm dog, Max, to be so agitated. As I stepped outside, I noticed someone, my neighbor Mr. Smith, ducking around near the fence. I looked at his face and he looked guilty as hell. It was a surprise to see him there so early in the morning, especially considering he rarely left his house. I was curious and so I called out to him. "Morning, Mr. Smith. What brings you here at this hour?" I could tell he was startled. He turned to face me and gave me a fake smile. He said good morning, and in a shaky voice he said, "I thought I saw something strange in your yard and decided to investigate." I raised an eyebrow suspiciously. "Strange? Like what?" Mr. Smith avoided eye contact. He was seeming more uncomfortable by the minute. "I thought I saw a stray dog sneaking into your yard. You know, I'm just looking out for the neighborhood." I simply nodded, unsure if I believed his explanation. "Well, thanks for keeping an eye out. I'll check on Max and make sure everything's fine." I ran towards Max's doghouse. I couldn't help but feel that something wasn't right. As I approached, Max's barks grew louder and more frantic. That's when I noticed the latch on the gate, a latch that had never been opened from the outside before, was unlocked. My heart sank and a cold shiver ran down my spine. I was immediately pissed off. I swung the gate open and entered the yard, my eyes frantically looking for any signs of Max. Finally, I spotted him in the far corner, cowering beneath a bush. His tail wagged weakly, and he looked up at me with a mix of relief and fear. I hugged Max and comforted him, but I felt anger boil within me. How could Mr. Smith betray our trust like this? I couldn't fathom why he would try to steal my freaking dog. I went back to the front of my house, Max still trembling in my arms. I confronted Mr. Smith. He was trying to give me a friendly smile, but failed miserably when he saw how angry I was. "What the hell were you thinking, Mr. Smith?" I demanded to know, "Why would you try to take my dog?" Mr. Smith's face twisted in guilt and shame. He sighed heavily and confessed, "I've been feeling lonely lately. My wife passed away last year, and I thought having a dog like Max would fill the void. I didn't know how to ask you, so I foolishly tried to take him without your permission." My anger softened, replaced by a deep sense of sympathy. I felt sorry for him but explained to him that stealing my dog would not have helped him in any way. Fast forward a few weeks later, I was pulling into my driveway when one of my neighbors pulled up to my car. She was looking for her small dog that has been missing for more than an hour. I told her I hadn't been home and told her she could check around my property. We checked together and there was no sign of her dog. I offered to drive her around the neighborhood, and we drove around for a few hours with no sign of her dog. Later that evening, I helped her post missing dog flyers all around our neighborhood and a few neighborhoods with a few miles. Just as we decided to call it a night, my neighbor got a concerning phone call. It was a man who had called to let her know her dog was found. She got the address and I drove her to the place where her dog was. We found out that the man hadn't found the dog but had purchased it earlier, only a few hours before. When we asked who the seller was, he described Mr. Smith. That's when I realized that Mr. Smith wasn't just the lonely man who he portrayed himself to be. He was a manipulator who was going around the neighborhood and stealing dogs to sell. I told my neighbor what happened with Mr. Smith trying to steal my dog, and immediately we called the police to report what had happened. My neighbor and I decided not to press charges after all, but we never spoke to Mr. Smith again and kept a close watch on our pets.
This story was sent to you from Andrea in California. One morning I woke up and got ready for work as usual. Most days I would hit the gym after work. With my gym bag slung over my shoulder, I made my way to the front door. But before leaving, I remembered that I needed to put my bag in the trunk of my car. I started opening my trunk, but had noticed, before I even opened it, that there was a bad smell coming from back there. I opened my trunk. I was met with a sight that jolted me awake faster than a triple shot espresso. Lying in my truck among my belongings was a man, disheveled and fast asleep. "What the heck?" I yelled. I was shocked and confused at the same time. I was trying to comprehend how this homeless dude found his way into my trunk. Did he think it was some kind of mobile home or something? Suddenly opened his eyes. He yawned and stretched as if he had just woken up from a luxurious slumber in a 5-star hotel. "Morning, Missy," he mumbled with a slight grin, acting as if it was the most normal thing in the world to be sleeping in a stranger's trunk. My brain scrambled to process the situation. Here I was, standing in front of a homeless man who had made himself comfortable in my car. It was like a twisted version of Goldilocks and the Three Bears, but instead of porridge, he had chosen my trunk as his perfect resting spot. As the man casually climbed out of the trunk, he dusted off his raggedy clothes and nodded at me. "Thanks for the cozy nap, lady," he said, his voice tinged with a mix of gratitude and nonchalance. And just like that, he walked away as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened. I stood there, dumbfounded, my gym bag forgotten in my hand. A mixture of disbelief, amusement, and slight irritation washed over me. Who was this guy? How had he managed to sneak into my car undetected? And most importantly, why in the world had he chosen my trunk as his makeshift bed? With a shake of my head, I gathered my thoughts and decided that dwelling on the bizarre encounter wouldn't get me to work any faster. Life in California was full of surprises, and this was just another unexpected detour on my journey. So, with a chuckle and a newfound story to share with my coworkers, I hopped into my car, gym bag in tow, and drove off, leaving behind the peculiar memory of the homeless man who had turned my trunk into his impromptu sleeping quarters.